So our team is pretty much Colette, Sherry, Michael, and myself, and we're going to talk about reimagining foster youth. And to start our presentation, we would like to give the opportunity to talk to someone that actually was a foster children.
Looking back on it, my life was a hell of a journey.
Okay. Yeah, so I actually went into the foster system. I was probably about 9, maybe 10, maybe close to 10. I was in foster care for about 7 years. I was in about 14 different homes, foster homes and group homes. You're just trying to survive, the week. It did make it hard for me to keep up with school, and I was always really interested in school. I always really liked it, and I did well at it. Like when I was 9 years old, I was like in all Excel classes, like before I got taken away. When I went to foster care, like it all changed. For a long time, I wouldn't even show up for like entire semesters at a time. The inconsistency, both in school and in placement. I would say that's the hardest part of foster care for me, was the inconsistency in general, but I think specifically it's with homes and how kids who aren't in foster care are silverware than kids in foster care are plasticware. Because, if something's wrong with your silverware, you wash your silverware, right? You don't throw them away.
So as you could hear from his testimonial, the foster youth system is a very complicated one, very complex, and the outcomes, they are not necessarily the ones that we as society expect or deserve or even want to. The status quo of the current foster youth system, we can describe it as a adultist, and I just learned about this word, but it means pretty much that are adults who are taking decisions on behalf of the children. It is pretty much agency-centered, in contrast to children-centered. Is risk-averse. Pretty much the goal of the foster youth system is for children to get or become 18 years old alive, and pretty much accomplishing the 3 basic needs: shelter, clothes, and food, and that's it. So for those standards, you can argue that they are that they are doing a pretty effective job, but we believe that as a society we deserve something better. You can also argue that it's a siloed system, one that is isolated. Children are isolated from other service organizations, and it's a reactionary one. They are always in an emergency mode. They are pretty much always, their intent is to avoid highlines, and that's it. The outcome so far, and as you can see in the slide, is pretty much the difference between foster children, the accomplishments they have as far as finishing the high school, or other people that are not in the foster youth system, how they actually succeed in completing the high school. You see that 50% of the foster youth, they become either incarcerated or homeless. So that's a pretty dire situation. Now, as you could see from the testimony in the beginning, now you have a third party saying pretty much the same. That foster youth, they have a lot of difficulties on self-advocating for themselves. And we as a team, we believe that foster youth, with the right tools, they can be confident of their own agency to succeed.
Thank you, Felipe. I have 2 props for you: silverware, plasticware. What we found, it was a difficult revelation when the young person we interviewed told us that they felt like plasticware. That's not something that we want the system to be causing children to feel like. There's this quote again. I want you to keep those images in mind as we move forward, and it actually leads to why we were prompted to come up with a solution that enables us to, instead of having these children look like or be or feel like plasticware, we framed it as these are our kids, not just kids in foster care. These are our kids. And what do we want for our kids? Think about it. What do we want for our kids? I'd like to involve the audience for a second here and bring the conversation to you. Raise your hand if you have kids, or if you are a godparent, or you are an aunt or uncle. Let's see the hands. Look around the room. Look at the hands. It looks like everyone in here has, thank you very much, has some interaction and has a part and an interest in the welfare of kids. And we use the phrase, instead of saying foster kids, we say our kids. So that's the way we wanted to move forward. Our North Star, because these are our kids, we're shooting for the moon with the North Star, actually beyond the moon, for the North Star. We want to we're reimagining a foster youth system with youth at the center, not adultist, but the youth at the center. We had examples to where young people were telling us that they didn't have information to show that they were born. They couldn't get access to their birth certificates. We want at the center activated, self-advocating, being able to have age-appropriate ability to advocate for themselves. Knowing their value is a key that you'll see follow through all of the rest of the information that we cover. Because value is very important. What's your value if you're plasticware? That shows what kind of value you have internalized. And on a path to a livable wage career in an emerging industry. And there's we won't go into it, but there's information that shows that the population is graying, and we're losing a large segment of our population who are young and could be working to a pipeline that leads not to our North Star. So that's our North Star. Because these are our kids, you can all think back and empathize with the fact that one of the first things your kids need to have is they need to understand they're valued. So as you look and hear further, you'll see that our intervention enables these young people to learn and actually be instilled with their value early. And that needs to be something that starts right away. Because with your child, your kid, you instill that value. You're valuable. They need to be invested in education, career advancement, preparing for the future. All the things we have looked at for our kids, these are our kids, we want the same thing. Consistency. As we heard, this young man moved around a lot. What can we do to provide some consistency? And independence, age-appropriate independence. The system now, as Felipe said, basically, we're just controlling you till you get 18 and then, hey, you're on your own, go, live your life. And we haven't given them the tools to be successful. And that's something we need to do. And then the ability to dream. As parents, we want our kids to dream. We want them to dream big. And this intervention facilitates enabling the children to dream. Because dreaming is actually the foundation for social innovation and for innovation in particular, and that's what we need for the emerging market and industry.
What if there's a different path? What if there's a different pipeline, basically, than the one that Felipe shared earlier, different from homelessness and different from incarceration, that leads to instead self-sufficiency, empowerment, investment, again, things that we would want for our own kids, rather than the statistics that we talked about earlier. It's interesting because according to recent data from the Department of Child and Family Services, over 50% of youth in foster care are Hispanic, and almost 25% of youth in foster care are African American. So that's 75% children of color in this system that are potential participants in those statistics that we talked about before of homelessness and incarceration. We can even look at data today and see where that could come from when you look at prisons today. So what we had come up with as a different path is this IGPS, individualized guides for and paths to success. And so what this is, and this is a mock-up of that, is a website. It's a digital tool to disrupt basically the current system. The audience for this is the foster youth. This is the user for this tool, for this system. It allows the foster youth to be able to have access to their information, to be able to drive some of the content, to be able to have a portal, if you will, a dashboard, to give them some agency, some control, some navigational control over their life and over the outcome. So just to walk through a little bit of this portal and what this would look like. So profile. So this is where we talked about and heard about how a foster youth can typically move around a lot. So this is where they might have, in this top section I should say, is some of the content that they would drive. It's personal data or personal information that they own and that they are able to develop as a foster youth. So this profile, their personal information, addresses, past addresses, to be able to keep track of their personal information. This journal, we all, or maybe many of us journal now, journaled as a kid, kept a diary. This is a place where we allow them to be able to keep track of that and have an online portal for that as well. Vision board, everyone processes information differently, some visually. So a place to be able to do that. And then we thought it would be necessary and helpful to have a chat function, something immediate. I need immediate contact. I need to talk to someone immediately. I'm depressed and I want to be able to find out where I can get some mental health services or information immediately. I need to take an SAT test. Where do I go to do that? Again, just immediate information. So this is, again, personally developed information by the foster youth. And then we have this section down here, which is where the community comes into play to be able to feed into this portal. So mentors, again, something really helpful that we all have either now or grew up with, coaches, life coaches, that type of thing, access to those individuals. Records, health records, school records. You heard from Lauren earlier talk about how he was a good student and he liked school until he went into the foster care system and things went awry for him. But he also mentioned in our conversation that he knew he had really high test scores, but he just didn't have access to that information. This is a portal where he can go, or a foster youth can be able to go and get access to all of their information. Again, health records, school records, that type of thing. Resources. While we were doing our research, we found that there's a ton of information out there, and there are tons of services out there, almost an overwhelming amount. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to have one place for me as a foster youth to be able to go, and especially to be able to get that information that's relevant and specific to me? I'll come back to the careers later, but then alerts. Again, as a parent, you know that you need reminders for doctor's appointments, for tests, for registration for that summer camp. This allows that foster youth to be in control of that information. And then a calendar, which is more of a big picture, just time management and scheduling piece. And then the career piece, one of the things I should mention is that we envision launching this at a middle school age, but this careers module would turn on when you go into high school. So this is something that becomes available when you're thinking more about what your career options are, community college, four-year university, what kind of career do you want to go into. So now we'll just drill down just a little bit into a couple of the different pages. The journal, we talked about being able to track yourself emotionally, mentally, and having a place for that. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to go back to this over time and be able to see your progress and how you're moving forward in life. And then this mentors page, we think it's critically important, again, as we have multiple mentors. We have a life coach, we have a health coach, we have someone who's helping us in our career. So this would be a place for the foster youth to be able to go and get access to those individuals, whether it be someone that they just connect to on a personal level, an education, a career mentor, but this place to be able to have a portal, a repository for all of that information. What's critical to this, obviously, is still that community. You still need those people and those organizations to be able to feed into this in order for this foster youth to be able to have access to that information.
So first of all, this was an amazing process that we decided that to begin, we would look at not what's wrong with the foster care system, but what do youth need? What is it that the foster youth population actually needs to make a difference in their lives? So we took the design thinking approach, which is used commonly in Silicon Valley. It's probably where we hear it the most. Apple is a great example of that, right? Looking at the phenomenal products that they've created to say, what do people actually need versus what are we dreaming up? You know, we've got technology, what can we invent that will just be fun for us to get involved with? So we really took a look at the foster youth themselves and said, you know, what is it that they need? And this idea of iGPS, a navigational system, accomplishes a couple of things. First of all, we've heard a lot about why. I wanted to talk a little bit about how. Like, how would this community actually come together around this idea? So there's some good news and there's bad news. I'll start with the good news. The good news is that in the course of researching this project, we made some discoveries. One took place about 2 weeks ago. Here in Los Angeles, there was actually a hack for foster care. Some people are shaking their heads, probably have heard about it. It was actually a phenomenal event in which you had tech companies, Department of Child and Family Services, nonprofits, foster parents, research institutions, all together over the course of an entire day, looking at tech solutions to foster care challenges. So now it's not quite bad news, but now the more common or more expected news, right? So the good news to underscore is that people are really getting together and looking at how can tech serve foster youth. But as we might expect, the approach, rather than being design thinking and thinking about what do youth need, there seemed to be a continuation, this wasn't everyone, but of the status quo that Felipe was so, powerfully described to us and that we heard Lauren speak to as well. That these agencies are all working to simplify, streamline, make their own agencies more efficient using technology, but what's still missing is that youth-centered approach that would actually allow us to have foster youth as empowered, foster youth as owning their own destiny, foster youth as actually being able to dream and not just sit in their room and dream if they in fact have a room, but actually begin to look at who do I call, who do I contact, rather than waiting for a caseworker or somebody from one of these groups to step in and advocate on their behalf. So getting back to that kind of status quo, if all of these groups are investigating tech, that's a really good thing. So I was inspired being at this event because what I saw was a coalition of the willing. And as we all know, the first step on the path to creating anything new, as we've learned in this program, right, is having the will to want to. So what we've discovered is that we asked the question, is iGPS doable? Right? Sounds like a really big idea. We're going to invent a dashboard that kids are going to have. And what I'll say about it is that it's not only a solution for youth, it's a win-win for everyone. The reality is, right, and we saw this in action, it was very exciting to see, that if all of these agencies and tech companies are already fortified and are willing and interested, what we need to do to close the gap between what they're already doing and inventing and having the iGPS become a reality is simply do what this slide is talking about, and that's integrate and create the already existing collective impact, but bring these agencies together. So it doesn't have to happen any differently than it's going right now, but the key is, and we've been looking at this with people who are already all on the forefront of reimagining the foster care system, is to really put all the power in the hands of youth. That's the distinguishing factor. So I see I have less than 5 minutes. So I want to really begin to move toward conclusion. And if you remember anything about this presentation today, I mean, it would be those simple 4 letters, iGPS. The idea that we now have the technology. We have Snapchat, we have Facebook, we have all of these analytics and algorithms and artificial intelligence that are already curating entire environments for us each and every day in our own echo chambers. So let's take a look at what a few people who are on the forefront of reimagining this world have to say. The first is Darrell Booker. Darrell was part of the hack for foster care in Los Angeles. He's a coder, he's a man of color, and his mother grew up in the system. And although he was never in the system himself, his mom, from the time she was basically born till she aged out at 18, was in the system. His family is affected by her journey every day. So he's dedicating his world to finding solutions and would be happy to work with us in the creation of iGPS. Dr. Troy Bayer, it's a name that may be familiar to you. She's actually an actress. She's been a journalist. She's worn a film director. She's worn many hats. But today, she's a clinical psychologist, and she calls herself, actually it's spelled wrong here, but a mind-ecologist. And what's interesting about Troy is that she was in the system for 3 of the most formative years of her life in high school. And what she said is that if one person had said to her, you can be anything that you want to be, she would have saved 10 years of migrating through all these various careers to find out what she's truly committed to. Lastly, David Ambrose, and many of us had the pleasure of meeting David and their heads shaking yes, because he was absolutely extraordinary. Today, David is one of the heads of corporate social responsibility at the Walt Disney Company, which we all know and are touched by. But David is touching lives in a different way. David is the co-founder of Foster More, which is an agency that's reimagining how parents, foster parents come into the system and reimagining who foster parents could be. David says, we need to build a new factory. And we were like, factory? What are you talking about? But that's code for, we need to rebrand the system. And I want to give you a quick example, and then we'll move on to our conclusion. David said that if we think about breast cancer, right, and many of us have been touched by that as well, just as we saw through Michael's demonstration that we're all touched by youth in our communities. Breast cancer has touched a lot of lives. But when you think of breast cancer, and I guess I'll ask the question that David asked us, what are some words that come to mind? Breast cancer and the fight against breast cancer. Any one word?
Komen.
What's that?
Komen.
Okay, Komen. Anything else? Research. Okay. Okay, how about a color? Pink. Okay, so pink. Right, so we didn't get there quite as fast as we did that day, but the idea is that when we actually begin to think about foster youth and the foster system, we want to do what breast cancer's done. We want pink, but in our case, we want to go back to what Michael was showing us, that plastic and that silverware. We want foster youth to be valued, and more importantly, to value themselves, because it does start with their own journey. So IGPS will allow them to have their own journey, will be another way for their voices to be heard, and to actually cultivate their own future through the use of AI technology and collective impact. So last but not least, in keeping with what we committed to in our North Star, we want to give the last word to Lauren Wood, who you heard from at the beginning of our presentation. Today, Lauren himself is a mental health care worker in the state of California, and he was honored last year for his extraordinary work. So here's what Lauren has to say about the foster care system.
I hope we never forget the stories of the youth we've worked with. I hope we never forget their faces or their names or their ability to persevere. I hope we never lose sight of the vision of them growing up and having that understanding to help people who need it. And I hope we never overlook their strengths. I hope we never forget their dreams.
Thank you very much.